Welcome to Energy Talks by Elmhurst Energy, your destination for insightful news and discussion on energy assessment, building performance, and EPCs.
Hello everyone, my name's Andrew Parkin and welcome to this Season 1, Episode 1 of the Energy Talks podcast. Now, it's an interesting one because as history will teach us, it's important to make a big deal of your first ever sort of episode. This is actually a continuation of a podcast series that was done through Stroma certification. But we're going to do things bigger. We're going to do things better on the Energy Talks. And I'm delighted that we're back doing podcasts. Just to do some introductions, obviously we've got Stuart Fairlie here from MD of Elmhurst Energy Systems. Want to say hello?
Hello, everybody.
Excellent. There we go. And it gives me great pleasure to welcome Keeran Jugdoyal from DLUHC, to give it its abbreviated form. Keeran, do you want to just do a very brief announcement, introduction to who you are and what you do at DLUHC?
Yeah, absolutely. And first of all, thank you for inviting me on the very first podcast. So, at DLUHC, I'm the head of the Energy Performance of Buildings Regulations team, and I'm also the head of DLUHC's Net Zero Buildings Hub, and I'm responsible for the actual law and regulations that govern the production of EPCs and the other energy certificates, the display energy certificates and air conditioning inspection reports.
So quite the remit. And obviously everything that in your world is our world, and we do spend an awful lot of time talking about various things, or invariably at similar meetings, or you come into various conferences that we're at. So it's great to have you here, and I do really appreciate you giving your time up to talk to us today about what is really important stuff for our industry, the EPC, and what it does, and more importantly, what it doesn't do. There will be people who listen to this podcast who got a passing interest in EPCs, maybe coming to EPCs for the first time, or they're long in the tooth energy assessors that have been around the block since the very start. So it's always a good idea for us to just introduce the subject of what the EPC is all about. And I just keep it fairly light and breezy, really. So I think we all agree EPCs are an important part of what this country is doing towards moving towards net zero, fighting climate change, trying to alleviate fuel poverty. But what do they do, Stuart? What is their primary purpose? And
I think if you go back, I think it's a good question, isn't it? Because I think the question of what they don't do is equally as important as what they do. It's a good point. To my mind, an energy certificate is a base position of a building with some people in it, and it tries to predict what that building will use, and I'm using my words quite carefully, whether that's energy in kilowatts, is it monetary spend, is it carbon emissions, and it allows the usefulness of that to be presented back to the building owner to make hopefully some good decisions. Most of them will also give recommendations, and we can go into, they do subtly different things in different buildings, but fundamentally it's the base position, and they use the national calculation methodologies to give a reasonably accurate set of information is the best way to describe it to building owners. That's the best way I could explain an energy certificate.
Yeah, I'm Keeran. This is your day to day. Anything to add to that?
Yeah, I will say that the government tend not to try and intervene in things unless there's a genuine market failure that others can't address. And I think, as people, when you're stood in front of the estate agent window looking at various properties, you can tell things just by looking at it. And if you go and look at the places, you can open cupboards and have a look and figure things out for yourself. But the energy performance of a building is something that's a bit less tangible, requires a bit of expertise, and the EPC kind of fills, it fixes that market failure, and I think is a vital part of that, allowing people to be informed at that point where they're making those really important decisions. Buying or renting a home is a really big decision for anyone, and it's there to kind of provide that gap.
Yeah, no, I was going to go back to the basics. You're absolutely right, and I think this sort of A to G sticker that people probably first saw on the side of their fridges, really, and sort of made a difference in that market. The idea that people, as Keeran said, could make a really good choice, or at least have the information to be able to make the choice, maybe a better way to describe. But it is that. I think we're in a space now where we want the people to start to look at more than just that A to G label, and that probably will come out of our conversation later today. Actually, there's so much more behind it, but that's almost like the headline, isn't it? It's the headline grabber. It's A or it's G, and I think we've just got to be, informing people what that means.
Yeah, I think if I was to add to that, I think they're simple but they're complicated, and that in itself is a blessing and a curse, because more and more people are interested in energy and energy performance, and cost of living has sort of brought that into focus, the energy crisis and the cost of energy, and so people are interested and they want to know more. And as you scratch away at the surface of what is a very simple message, improve your building, save money, save energy, save the planet, that kind of messaging, is actually quite a lot of complexity behind the methodologies. They've been around a long time, they've evolved and they've developed, and they are complicated. They take some very, very clever people a long time to put together and to evolve them as well. So I think if somebody asked me to add sort of something that they didn't know about them, that would be an example. Also, the difference between domestic and commercial EPCs is something that's fairly subtle but not well understood for anybody outside of our industry. And that kind of brings us on to other points as well. So your domestic EPC is weighted heavily by the cost of fuel. So the cheaper your fuel, the better your rating tends to be. Obviously, it depends on how efficient the building is as well. Whereas commercial EPCs are weighted by the carbon. And then that's kind of, I think, segues fairly nicely into why did we focus on fuel poverty for domestic, i.e. the fuel cost, and why did we focus on carbon for commercial? And is there an opportunity to do both of those? I don't know, Keeran, is that something your department have probably had those sorts of questions multiple times over the last year?
Absolutely, and it's a very live issue, especially now that we've been in the midst of an energy crisis, which has then led to really rapidly rising energy bills. We are asking ourselves, what are the priorities for government? Does the carbon agenda need to take a backseat to making sure that people can pay those bills? And there isn't a right answer. I think there are short-term and long-term agendas that are at play, and sometimes opposed to each other in what we want to drive out of these things. And I think different stakeholders, as you right point out, people in their homes have very different concerns to businesses wanting to operate. And so I think that's the reason why we've ended up in a situation where the domestic and non-domestic EPCs have different focuses. But as we move forwards, as the net zero agenda becomes more important, or as energy security and fuel costs become more of which one of those is the overriding one that should dictate what an EPC is for, is a discussion. I'm sure we'll talk about it a bit more as we talk about the future plans for EPCs, but it's one that we wrestle with a lot. And
I'm not surprised, Keeran, because we hear it, we read the same newspapers and everything else. So I think the good news, and the half glass full, if that's the expression, is the methodology is actually deliver all of those metrics. So the possibilities are endless, aren't they? It is right back in 2006, 2007, when these things first sort of came to more regulatory requirements. They were chosen on those, cost and carbon. But actually, the good news, they can do all three on both non-domestic and on domestic homes. So, as I said, whatever we want to do, I say we, the sort of the government, the sort of us as stakeholders, it's all possible.
I guess that would take us on to a natural question, which I was going to ask at the end, I suppose, and I'll probably keep my powder dry on that, which is what's next for the EPC. But in the here and now, I mean, they are used for so many different things, and things that we perhaps don't always appreciate as well. the energy performance certificate rating impacts on what we perceive as value now within a building's, whether we say a building is worth more or worth less as a result of their energy performance. And that's something I think we always thought would happen, happening now. Do you think that's a good thing?
I think it's really, really important. It's just a shame, as Keeran said, that it took a national massive shift in prices to get people to sort of sit up, unfortunately, and say, wow, these things are interesting. Maybe I should have looked at them a bit closer. I mean, savvy people have always looked at them. I'm going to be honest. There's always a percentage of people who would have looked at that and said, that's a good decision to buy this home or this building. You're speaking to that sector, they're going to say, yeah, but it's got a nice car park, it's got access to good schools, and they're really, really important to people to make decisions. Quite frankly, that's quite right. But energy it took that seismic shift of fuel price, I think, to really put it in its place. There's a lot of agenda around, as you said, net zero and getting that greenness, and that's always been a nice thing. But the shift, which is a great shame, but anybody that knows me, I've been shouting about this, the idea that energy efficiency wasn't switching your fuel, but your supplier, which seemed to be the only game in town for about 15 years, it's no longer the case, is it? It's actually people have got to start saying, what can I do to reduce the energy I use in the building? And that's a different conversation. And that answers your question. They're used for different reasons now.
Yeah. And Keeran, obviously the regulations when they first came out were designed to work with the sale or rental market. But we're seeing a lot more sort of triggers of the EPC now. People are getting them done because the building's changed and they want the EPC to be reflective of those changes before they market a property, as an example. We've also had MEES land as well in the last 3 or 4 years, which has been pretty seismic for our industry. How does the department sort of work with other departments on the uses of EPCs? You're kind of the custodians, but you're not the custodians of the methodology.
That's right. There's quite a convoluted relationship on how my department own the regulations that govern the requirement to have an EPC. However, the Department for Energy and Net Zero own the SAP or the methodology that sits underneath it for domestic side, but the non-domestic methodology lives somewhere else again. So it's more complicated than I think a lot of people appreciate. And I also, in terms of who uses it, you mentioned MEES just there, but there are an increasing number of other government policies like grant schemes, like the boiler upgrade scheme, the warm homes discount, that also rely on an EPC and would actually cause people to actually go out and have these measurements. And not only that, like they are used for target setting. A lot of government will measure how progress against targets, against how EPCs have changed over time. So we've got a lot of stakeholders that we end up having to engage with, and they all have quite different, well, not all, but certainly what they want out of an EPC regime is different for different people, and keeping all of them happy and providing what they need is a challenge. And the way that we try and see it within our particular team is that we want to make the tape measure to measure something, and then what people do with that measurement is then up to them. So our focus should be on making the most accurate and reliable tape measure for others to then build whatever they want to do with it, and that they have trust in what it comes out of that.
Brilliant answer from Keeran. I may pinch that if I ever go to a talk, Keeran, if you don't mind. But yeah, the idea that we've always said you're trying to give as close to the truth as possible, aren't you? So people can, like you said, make a choice. And that doesn't have to be just the building owner, does it? It could be, like you said, the policy makers and saying, well, I've presented you all this information. If you want to piggyback this policy to do X or this policy to achieve net zero, you've got the numbers to allow you to make that decision. So, wholeheartedly back you on that one, Keeran.
Excellent. Good discussion there. And of course, the DLUHC now are the custodians of the register as well in Wales and Northern Ireland, which is a fairly big shift from where we were a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago. that's important, isn't it, Keeran? That the government can keep be the custodians of that register.
Absolutely, it's made such a big difference. I mean, behind the scenes, one of the big changes that we made when we brought it in, and we've been really insistent on, is that the developers, the people with the software, the code up on screen, are sat right next to the policymakers, and when we have discussions about how we want the policy to change, we have a lot of discussions about who are our end users, what information do they need, and the people who can impact the change and test it with users are sat right there, and it's all part of the same discussion. And also, changes can be really quick. I think sometimes when you outsource a service, you write, a 2-year contract to deliver something. To change the scope of that requires a change of contract, whereas now you can have a quick discussion. They start coding it the next day, and you see it, a few days later. And it's made a huge difference also to our ability to share data. I know there are limits in the regulations on how free we can actually be about sharing data, which we're working through to try and be more liberal with that. However, because we own such a large data set, we've managed to be able to create backdoors for people to come and, like other departments. Let's say I've mentioned that the boiler upgrade scheme rely on EPCs. They don't need to go to the register. They can have government-to-government department access to that data to run their own services, which has just been a really great piece of joined-up government that cuts costs and makes a really flexible service.
Great. I didn't know that, so I've learned something new today already. Thanks, Keeran. We're into, I think, the nitty-gritty of our conversation now, which is we're currently in a situation where everyone's looking at their energy costs, the price of fuel, how to make their homes more efficient is part of what they're considering. There is a lot of focus on the EPC, which is great because that's what we've wanted for a long time, haven't we, Stuart? We wanted a light to be shone on the EPC, and it's our time to shine. But we're getting a bit of criticism. Why do you think that is?
I think it comes back to what we sort of touched on earlier. EPCs, I think one of the headlines I saw there, they were misleading, I think was this phrase that I've seen used. I think they're misunderstood. I don't think they're misleading. I think the fact, as we've already alluded to, they're used for so many different reasons. So the classic example for a home, if we just stick on homes for a second, is, it suggests a fuel bill for your house. And somebody says, that's not my bill. I use double the amount, or it's half of that, or whatever. So it's not really about the people in the house, because as I said earlier, it's about these standard people averages. So it's a good place to look and contrast various houses to buy or to rent on a basis that you're comparing apples to apples. Mm-hmm. So I think it's the question it comes back to earlier that we talked about. What are they? What are they not? And I don't think EPCs will ever do absolutely everything we want them to do. We just need to build upon the base infrastructure of the energy certificate in the first place, and then overlay it with the occupancy. And so all of the various challenges and misunderstandings, in my humble opinion, is that we just need to go to the next phase. We need to go, right, what do the occupants do in that house, or how much metered energy do they use? And those bits of information will add layers. So you don't get rid of one. You combine those 3 bits of data, and when you get to that, I think we'll solve most people's problems.
I mean, Keeran, again, your department's probably getting queries and questions left, right, and centre. What are you hearing?
Yeah, absolutely. We hear a lot about people questioning the accuracy of their EPCs. I think some of that comes down to not fundamentally understanding what it's there to measure. I think there's a general expectation that it's related to, their in-use bills rather than the performance of the building itself. But I do think there are, you said earlier that the EPC is quite a complicated methodology that sits behind it, but there's always room to get better, to improve, to take on board, as Stuart said, more data. There is some really interesting bits of research being done to see how smart meter data, along with other data, can give you a picture of how your buildings are performing. That's all in the kind of initial pilot phases. But if good things come out of that, who knows how that could be then introduced into the way that we go forwards and measure our buildings and, incorporate all those good learnings into the EPC.
Yeah, it's a very interesting point in time. We've got a methodology that's of an age now, and is going to go through another cycle of improvement. And then there's going to be a fairly big cycle of improvement, we think, coming down the line in SAP 11, and that will leach into RD SAP and further development of the non-domestic methodologies. Technology is moving on at pace, and we need to keep pace with that, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's the key, isn't it? You need little and often improvements, as Keeran says, to get them as accurate as possible, and technology is going so fast. Fuel prices are changing quite rapidly, so you need a sort of sensible approach to this, so that there's improvements, as I said, on a timely basis. You don't want them every day, because nobody then has a benchmark to actually compare and contrast. So, you can't have that. You have to have a bit of consistency for building regulations or some standards that are set against it. So I think we can all have a reasonable compromise, but you're absolutely right. Keep improving them, keep getting them better, keep getting them as close to the truth as possible, and actually give the numbers back to those owners. And as I said, by freeing up that, you allow them hopefully to understand that a bit better.
Yeah, I certainly think that they've been misrepresented. What an EPC is and what it isn't.
Do you think actually it's sort of like the only game in town, and therefore by nature everything hangs off it, and it's just not appropriate? And I think that sometimes is, on a positive, at least they're there and they're the base position. On a negative, they're just misunderstood. So yeah,
and certainly going back to the start and trying to replace them with something else. And this is my opinion, I think it just isn't going to achieve anything, because we'll be back where we were 20 years ago, staring at it, and we still have the same problems of repeatability, accuracy. A model is fundamentally inaccurate, isn't it? It's just there's degrees of inaccuracy built into every model, and one size doesn't fit all. But I will say this. I've been in the industry long enough, and I've seen the other things that have gone on in the industry, and it's very cyclical. The same things come round again. Yeah. And I do fundamentally believe in the methodologies and their ability to move forwards, to be adapted, to improve, because that's how they've been built. We will see some big changes to them in the future, and that's good as well. But I do think they are the starting point for an awful lot of things, and you build in other bits of data, bring in data from different data sets, and you can really build up a good picture about a building, how it's used, its energy use, why its energy use is what it is. And I think that's where we're heading, isn't it? Ultimately, I think education is key, though, and I would be interested. I mean, Keeran, what do you know of anything happening in government at the moment around consumer education? There's been a little bit of that's gone on the national press around energy costs and the fuel cost crisis. But is there anything coming down the line, do you think, that might help the consumer understand energy performance?
Yeah, absolutely. I think government are increasingly aware of the demand for people to get better quality information about what they can actually be doing in their own buildings. And that's not just because of the fuel bills or because of their concerns over climate. Just I think people, for their own reasons, have their own drivers for wanting to know what they can do. And a lot of policies may be trying to drive, let's say, for example, the move to install more heat pumps in buildings. Government has a target to try and get to a lot more heat pumps over the next 10 years. And people be asking, how do I go about doing that? And they're looking for a trusted source of information they don't think, if someone knocks on your door and offers you a heat pump, you're wondering, well, what's their angle? Where is it? I think government realizes there's a role here for kind of impartial advice that people can trust and base their decisions on. And so, what we're at the very initial phases of is having a kind of one-stop shop of good quality information that kind of spans what can I do in this building, so that each individual, let's say there was a heat pump policy, that funds heat pump, that it didn't have to create its own advice service. It would use the same advice service that all other government policies do. And I think we're at the very initial phases of those kinds of discussions, but I think going forwards, we're going to see a lot more in this space about just educating people about how to do more and take action into their own hands in a way that people can trust that they're doing the right thing.
Yeah, just to build upon the whole interest. Why do we do it in the first place? It was what was next. You didn't just stop at an energy certificate. Oh, great, I've got one. I'm going to stick it in my drawer for being able to rent my house or let it. It wasn't that, was it? It was actually to tell you these were the things you could do over the next 5 or 10 years. So I agree with Keeran. Consumer education, but it also needs to be in the right language. It needs to be consumer friendly, doesn't it?
Yes.
We could talk about very, very technical stuff, but people just gloss over. They just really want to know. Some people would only want to know the basics of what it is, but that next step of where to go to next, that's the challenge. I think we're in that space. Keeran said that space of I need to go and do A and B. Where do we go next? And to be fair, an awful lot of activities taking place in that, I think, around retrofit and stuff. Yeah. So I think, again, the stars are aligning, but not quite as quick as everybody wants it for the mass scale of 26 million homes or whatever, but we're getting there.
Yeah, it's always been a big challenge, though, hasn't it? And to an extent, it's been a challenge that could be dealt with another time. When we look back, we are in that time now. And I think a decade of change, maybe 15 years of change are afoot from all areas. How we use our buildings and how we use our homes is going to change. It's already changed. COVID's taught us that. Where we're at home more often, we use it for work. We're going to soon be using them to charge our vehicles if we go electric car. And so that's a big change. Are they going to become mini power plants themselves? Yeah. The way we use them is going to change. And if a heat pump is installed, the way it's heated and the temperatures and the cycles will change. So we've got to educate. We've also got to think about what that change means and the order in which to do things and setting the expectations to consumers as well, I think is really important. The news that I hear is that, well, heat pumps don't work. Or they work for me, but they don't work for me. And it's like, well, but that's because people have started on the wrong footing. They don't realise that you probably need to change yourself and your building in order to get into this period of transition.
Yeah. But I know. I mean, people should. I'll go back to different people have different drivers. And I think Keeran said it earlier. People will focus on what they want to focus on for that particular period. And I keep coming back to it. And I mean, anybody that's seen anything from Elmhurst, we talk about this sort of food label approach to an EPC, and it always makes me chuckle. Sort of thinking, that you don't tell the person going to the supermarket, you must buy this, do you? They go and they make their based on what their belief is that they want from that. Is it the salt? Is it the saturated fats? Is it the whatever? And you can help and you can nudge people to make good choices if you want them to, or you incentivize them. And I'm not putting Keeran on the spot, but there's various ways the government could go around incentivizing people, like say with grants and funding, to encourage the behaviour they want them to do. Or you can regulate and say your house should be or your building should be this. But again, I think it comes down to people. And people understanding what they want and delivering that sort of message. And, I don't think there's a magic bullet that solves energy, carbon and cost at the moment. And that to me is a big challenge we've got at the moment as well. So, yeah.
Keeran, I'll come to you. The change isn't just going to be in the industry and within the consumer, within the home. It's going to be within regulation and legislation. There's lots of things in progress at the moment, and there's some consultations that have been out there for a long time that need concluding. But fundamentally, there's a legislative challenge ahead, isn't there, from EPBR? Do you want to just cover a little bit about that, just so that those
sure, yeah, absolutely. Yet? So you're right. So as you're aware, EPCs are derived from a European directive, but we now no longer have to maintain alignment with them. So we're now in a position where we're free to kind of define what the future of EPC regulations look like in a way that works specifically for us in the UK. And so as part of that, we're currently looking to seek new powers to create new regulations. At the moment, for those of you who follow Parliament, you may have noticed that there's an energy bill going through Parliament that hopefully will be enacted at some point this year, and at which point within there are new powers for us to make brand new energy performance of buildings regulations. Now, we don't have any particular plans to scrap the existing ones and replace them with anything new. As you said, there's too much already in place. There are too many existing schemes and targets that rely on knowing that the existing regime will be maintained. However, there is a real opportunity to do something more going forwards, to kind of add more to what we do, to provide more accurate, reliable and trustworthy EPCs. And so, hopefully within the next 6 months or so, we will go out to consultation on what those new regulations could look like. We've got a range of questions asking people their views on what would you like to see on your EPC? What would you like it to do for you? What would you like that information to provide you that will then allow you to take the steps to make a real change? So those are the kinds of questions we want to answer with this consultation. And then once we get everybody's feedback on what they want, we can then go ahead and redraft the regulations that support those actions, that really allow people to make decisions in their own homes. It allows businesses to build products and services that, are aligned with improving our building stock. And it'll allow, regulators who are in the wider EPC ecosystems, the MEs and the various grant funds to then build proper regulations that are supported by this brand new framework. So that's all coming up. Hopefully, you'll start seeing it this year through a consultation, and then ongoing in the next few years through the implementation of the findings that we get from that.
And part of that is data as well. We've got issues at
Absolutely.
the moment. Data.
So yes, one of the big things that we want to unlock is making data really work for people. We have one of the most comprehensive data sets in government in the EPC register. It's just such a valuable resource on what the state of our country's houses look like, and what houses and non-domestic building. And it's so useful to be able to just take snapshots across the piece and see, here's the areas we need to focus on. Here's where we can see we've made improvements from various policies, and making that freer and more available to the people who own the buildings, to people who plan products and services, who are looking for innovations, to lenders, to make it available to all these people in the most, granular and valuable way is a key part of what we're going to consult on.
I think it's one of the most essential parts of what you'll be doing over the next 2 or 3 years. The point there is 2 or 3 years. So we need to set expectations, don't we? There are organisations out there, individuals who want this stuff now, but we are a couple of years away really from things starting to be implemented. So that's I think important to say. I don't know if there's anything else you want to come on that one, Stuart.
No, I'm delighted to hear that. We need to see that consultation, as Keeran says. Is that here's all the ideas. What does everybody else think? And then from that we can make some changes. It will never be perfect. That's the point, isn't it? But it needs to be that evolving process, which just keeps going. And back about quality, back about confidence in what I'm getting.
Yeah.
It's as up to date as possible. It's easy to read and understand, and you can go from there to somewhere else to make good decisions. So all the nice words. But I think it's a joined up approach. One thing on itself will not make a massive difference, but all of those things together, I think, is so. Yeah, we're really welcome when we see it, and we can obviously feed that out to as many people as stakeholders as we can, that they all have some sensible responses to it, really.
Excellent. Good. So where does that leave the EPC action plan? Because that was in progress, still is in progress. Will we continue to see developments in those areas, or is that now waiting on the consultation in the the regulation?
No, it's an ongoing piece. When it first came out, there were 35 actions. We managed to complete 11 of them, about a third really. Another third actually require legislative changes. So they're waiting on that consultation and the then updated regulations. And then the final third, some of them have moved into business as usual improvements. So they're not things that ever come to an end and we can cross off the list and say they're done. In fact, just last week, we as a team went through all the actions and categorized them into what's complete, what's waiting on the conversation, but what is now in business as usual. And there are only 2 or 3 which are not in that one of those 3 categories and still need some targeted action to complete. And I have a plan. Well, we as a team have a plan to make sure that, within the coming months that we pick up a bit of momentum on those final ones and really get that action plan, draw a line under it so we can move forwards with the new actions that come forward through the consultation.
I mean, one of those things in the action plan was a updated methodology. We've seen SAP 10.2 come out last year. It's been a challenging period for everyone concerned, but we're sort of coming out the end of that now. We're looking at RDSAP 10. Is there anything further to say on RDSAP 10 at this moment in time? Or
yeah, absolutely. We recognise that under normal timeframes, RDSAP will follow SAP changes fairly rapidly. However, due to a number of disruptions, it's been slowed down somewhat. But it is very much a live piece of work that the Department of Energy and Net Zero are taking forwards. I had a meeting with them very recently, and I think they are moving it forwards. I think there's going to be some announcements on that one. Actually, can I take this one? I'm not sure how much I can say on this one, but between the two of us, I met them yesterday.
I suspect there will be a future podcast on RDSAP.
Yeah, but can I say that it's going forward? So RDSAP is moving forwards. We hope to be able to make an announcement on that one.
As Keeran says, it needs to happen, and it's the Department of Energy. The interesting dilemma that we've all got as well is we know that recognise they're going to do a consultation on SAP 11 very shortly, because the timescales to get to the future homes and the future building standard for non-domestic is 2025. So those consultations are going to happen pretty rapidly too. And obviously, I don't think they're in in DLUHC anymore. I think they've gone to the health and safety, haven't they? So the sort of like as Keeran says, the regulations and who's owning which part, it's all a sort of a moving feast, isn't it? So and time marches on, doesn't it?
It does. I mean, I can't believe we're now in halfway through 2023, and the new building regulations are a year and a half away.
They're not far.
They're not far at all. Yeah. So it is, the pace of progress needs to happen because the size of the challenge is so great. We've got to reduce our carbon emissions. We've got to cut down global warming, and the only way to do that is focus on the areas that are producing lots of carbon. Transport, buildings.
I think some of the, Keeran, I never put you on the spot, Keeran. I think something that you mentioned earlier about fuel security, funnily enough, has suddenly become quite front. Yeah. So it's such it works at the micro level of somebody's individual building, their home or their business, but at the macro level, this is important stuff. As Keeran says, that data that that the government sit on is it's like a gold pot of information for so many different levels of the economy, and everybody's got something to do in this space, and each government department, I'm sure, has got different stuff to do in this space as well. So, interesting times.
So what I'm hearing, just to sort of conclude, I'm going to ask a question, and then I'll sum up, and I'll come back to you for your answers. What can we do next that will improve our industry? So obviously to you, Keeran, and to Stuart, you can have a think about that simple question. What can we do next to improve our industry? I'll come back to you in a second. So, but what I'm hearing is EPCs are an important part of so many things that we're doing at the moment. The data that sits behind them, the data that our members are collecting day in and day out is really, really important data. It's relied upon. It's quoted. It's used for research. It's used by different organisations. The data is becoming more freer and will be freer in the future. We hope. And there's a future for everything that our members are involved in. It's a really exciting time to be an energy assessor. It's a really exciting time to be involved in retrofit. We are at the start of this decade or so of change, and we're all going to have to run fairly quickly to keep up with that change, which in itself makes it exciting. I suppose I can, if I was to give my 2 words of, I am excited, but I'm frustrated. And I've said this a couple of times now. I want to get on. I want us to get on with making a difference, because it's about making a difference. And the majority of people in our industry are in it to do good work, to make a difference. And never before has it been so important that we do a good job. So what can we do to improve our industry? Stuart Fairlie.
Me? Oh, I was hoping you were going to Keeran first. If I had to call one thing, I think I'd like to see what I would refer to as the occupancy model become more upfront. So the idea that the asset is the energy calculation, you then take the people and you do an occupancy model for them to basically model what they'll predict what they should use in the building. So that takes care of an awful lot of the misunderstanding. Because Kieran's already rightly identified, we're looking at the meter data and bringing that back in. So again, a bit of focus on occupancy. We're very much about asset and SAP and RD SAP and all these models being improved. I think the big chunk that's missing is the occupancy model, because the meter is now starting to come back. Yeah. And I think if we get all 3, I think then we can really have a proper informed debate with people. So that would be my plea.
Okay, excellent. Keeran, any thoughts from you?
Yeah, so I'm going to think about it with my net zero buildings hat on as well as my EPC one, and I think there's a role for government to be more joined up in all manner of regulations and incentives that the EPC is part of. It is the building block for which so many other things then build off, and it needs to lead to action, because by 2050, every single one of our homes will not be using gas or fossil fuels as its heating source. And that requires such a massive amount of action to take place, not just information, not just guidance, but people doing things. And I think there's a role for government to kind of really join up the EPC with all the other agenda, not just the decarbonisation, but the decent home standards. We have some of the oldest building stock in Europe, and there are numerous issues of damp and mould and all these other health and well-being issues that need addressing in these buildings. If we're going to go in and fix them from an energy and carbon point of view, we need to fix those other things which are all related. And I think we as government need to step up and make sure that we're linking in and providing the information that then leads to action that addresses the quality of our buildings as a whole.
I really like that answer. And next time I see you, Keeran, I want to see you wearing your net zero buildings hat, because I don't know what that looks like, but I can imagine it's amazing. So let's see if you accept that challenge. Keeran Jugdoyal, thank you very much for attending our first podcast. This is going to go out to all our membership, all X number of thousand members out there, and to the wider world. So fame and fortune are yours, absolutely guaranteed. And I look forward to you coming back and talking to us in an unspecified period of time and giving us an update on all those points.
I'd be absolutely delighted to. Thanks.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. And Stuart Fairlie, Elmhurst Energy, MD. You'll be on one of these in probably in a couple of weeks' time. So I'll let you take a break and enjoy the rest of your day. To our listeners, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed that first podcast. There's more to come. We'll have a schedule of these throughout the year. So keep your ear to the ground and don't forget to subscribe to the podcast, and you'll get them delivered directly to your device or something like that. So have a good one. Enjoy the summer when it starts. Have a good one, and good luck with all your EPCs and retrofit activities.
Thank you for listening to Energy Talks. Don't forget to subscribe and send your questions and feedback to marketing@elmhurstenergy.co.uk.